Figure out who's deciding.
Mhm.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Victorville's Planning Commission meeting for July 12th, 2023. I'll call this meeting to order at 5:02 p.m. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner March,
Here.
Commissioner Messin.
Here.
Commissioner Thomas.
Present.
I have absent Vice Chair Cook Askins and Chair Kurtz. The commission will need to elect a temporary presiding officer. At this time, I'll call for nominations for temporary presiding officer. Do we have nominations?
I nominate Commissioner Thomas.
Is there a second?
I second.
I have a first by Commissioner Mars, a second by Commissioner Messin. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner March,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas is temporary presiding officer at this time, and she'll preside over the meeting.
Okay, next up, we will have our invocation that will be led by Commissioner Messin, and the pledge after that will be led by Commissioner Thomas myself. Stand, please. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready? And I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic which is stands one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you, staff and public, and please bear with me. This is my first time presiding, so I will do my best. Don't hesitate to call me if there's an issue or a question. At this time, we're ready for general public comments. The Planning Commission is interested in hearing from the public. Individuals from the public may speak on agenda items or on issues not posted on the agenda during this public comment section, providing those issues are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. Individual speakers may address the Planning Commission once per public comment period and once per each public hearing for up to 3 minutes. For those attending the meeting in person and though not required, please complete a speaker card prior to the start of the meeting and place in a clear speaker box located on the dais counter. If you would like to comment on a public hearing item, please submit a speaker card before the public hearing item is announced. Once comments are invited, the speaker will only be called on by name, then recognized by the presiding officer. Audience members may not disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the orderly conduct of this meeting. Your understanding and cooperation are appreciated. With that, I will open up the public hearing for general public comments. Do we have any speaker cards?
We do. Our first speaker is Selena Thimes for agenda item number 5.
Good evening, distinguished commissioners and city staff. My name is Selena Thimes, and I am a member of the Victorville chapter of the Coalition for a Tobacco-Free San Bernardino County. I want to start off by saying we appreciate you taking the time to address the issue of alcohol and tobacco use in our community. The drafted ordinance you are reviewing tonight is a wonderful start, but it is missing some key points we feel are important. As you may know, Senate Bill 793 passed last year, banning the sale of flavored tobacco products in California. SB 793 made it so each local jurisdiction is responsible for the enforcement of this new law. For this reason, we believe that clearly designating an enforcement agency for the ordinance we are discussing is important in making sure that tobacco retailers are compliant with state and local laws. As written, we do not feel that this ordinance adequately addresses the issue of local enforcement and lacks specific definitions that would facilitate the implementation of such a policy for the city of Victorville. Also, we ask that you reconsider some of the language included in the policy to ensure that youth are not criminalized for the purchase, use, or possession of tobacco products. The responsibility should be placed on the tobacco retailer that is selling these products to underage youth. Furthermore, considering that tobacco prevention is not a land use issue, but instead a product issue, we encourage the city to consider separating the tobacco retail license provision into its own ordinance. This would ensure that all regulations and requirements are compliant with state law as well as more easily enforceable. Therefore, we urge you to reconsider the written ordinance and meet with us to discuss how to better address these important community concerns. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kenneth Artry.
Good evening. My name is Kenneth Artry. I come to you today as a High Desert resident and as a former Youth Corps participant. The drafted ordinance you are reviewing tonight is a great start, but is missing some key points we feel are important. I know firsthand what tobacco sales to youth look like from a small and large retailers. I and my peers do not see any reason to exempt large retailers from the same guidelines and regulations. It is crucial to ensure that tobacco products do not fall into the hands of young people, and it's important to know that large and small tobacco retailers are still selling to youth despite the efforts to prevent it. Exempting large retailers from regulations would not address the problem at hand. Instead, we need to work collaboratively with these retailers to enforce regulations effectively and curb tobacco sales to minors. Large companies like Walmart, Target, and CVS are taking the stance to protect youth access to tobacco. It's important for companies to prioritize the well-being of their customers, especially when it comes to products that can harm them. Another thing we would like you to consider is expanding on the definition of tobacco products and the prohibition of flavored tobacco. It is crucial for local regulations to align with state laws such as SB 793. By implementing clear and concise guidelines, it becomes easier for everyone to understand the responsibilities and comply with the regulations. This not only benefits the community by reducing youth access to tobacco products, but it also promotes public health at large. If the suggested changes are too extensive and don't fit well with a deemed approved ordinance, we suggest that you remove tobacco altogether and address these issues through a separate ordinance, such as a tobacco retail license. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Mike Grabhorn.
Thank you. Good evening to Planning Commission and city staff. And I'm with the High Desert Community Coalition. I've been a member since they started probably about 12 years ago. We first tackled the synthetic drugs and got an ordinance passed in Victorville on that, which then went to the county and was passed for the county areas to outlaw the sale of spice and the other synthetic drugs. So what brought us to this, we're working with the Tobacco Coalition, and we started approximately 2 years ago on working with the ordinance to outlaw drug paraphernalia and other drug related instruments that were sold in smoke shops. We did assessments on every smoke shop in the high desert. Every single smoke shop in Victorville sells pipes that are used to smoke methamphetamine. They are the long tube with the round ball on the end. The way they get around this is they call it oil burner instead of a meth pipe. They say that you can burn air freshener in it and blow it out, and this will freshen the air in your room. I'm a recovering addict myself. I know that these pipes are only used for smoking drugs. That's the only thing they're used for. And they're freely sold with no law enforcement, no repercussions. There's also many other different aspects that are sold in smoke shops that are used for illicit drugs. We're not talking about marijuana, as that's pretty much legal now, but methamphetamine, DMT, heroin, all these type of drugs. So we have been working with Scott and other members of the city staff to promote an ordinance for outlawing these things. Under the Health and Safety Code of the state of California, they should be against the law, but it's not specific. We need specific, and in the ordinance that is put forward right now, they aren't specific enough. It says drug paraphernalia, which is how they got around it in the first place, was just calling it a different name. We need specifically listed meth pipes, scales, electronic cigarettes or electronic burners that heat really high to melt heroin and crystal meth, these type of things. I would ask that we move the ordinance forward, but that we also have room to change some of the wording in it and add a few things. And as I said, it's very difficult for people that were addicts when you go around and you see these different things for sale.
Your time is up.
So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I have no additional speaker cards. However, we did have one public comment via email, which was distributed to the commission and posted on the website.
Commissioner Thomas, if I might, I'd just like to advise, since item number 5 is not a public hearing, this would be the only time that we can receive public comment on item number 5. So just wanted to let the audience know if there's anyone else wanting to speak on item 5, this is your chance.
Okay. I don't see any hands or anyone coming up, so we'll move along. Thank you. Okay, there being no other audience members wishing to speak, I'll close the public comment period, and that brings us to agenda item number 1, approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
I have a first by Commissioner Messin, a second by Commissioner Marsh. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes with Vice Chair Cook Askins and Chair Kurth being absent.
Okay. Thank you, and that takes us to agenda item number 2 under public hearings. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas, members of the commission. Agenda item number 2 is case number PLAN 23-00013, a development agreement amendment to update the term of the existing agreement and allow for an additional 1-year extension of time for tentative tract map number 14525, a 319 lot single family residential subdivision that was previously approved and environmentally assessed on property located west of and abutting Starter Wells Road, south of Interstate 15, and approximately 2,000 linear feet north of D Street. This project was originally approved in 2009, and as noted, this entitlement will allows for a 319 lot single family residential subdivision on an approximately 80 acre site within a planned unit development zoning designation. The project is split into 7 phases and allows lots of no less than 5,000 square feet. The planned unit development designation also has requirements for additional amenities such as a clubhouse, a swimming pool, and enhanced landscaping throughout the site. A little history on this tract. After exhausting all administrative and legislative time extensions provided by the Subdivision Map Act, the City Council approved a development agreement on this project via ordinance number 2430, which became effective on August 19th, 2022, and is set to expire on August 19th, 2023. As noted, the previous development agreement was approved for a period of 1 year, which would allow for the recordation and the associated final maps. However, the developer has encountered unforeseen final engineering difficulties due to the site's elevation and location of the sewer within abutting Starter Wells Road. Additional delays have been, this tract has been subject to delays relating to requirements for improvements at the Mojave River and dealing with different agencies outside of the city of Victorville. As proposed, the development agreement amendment complies with the general plan, complies with the underlying zoning, would provide no adverse impacts to the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of the city or to orderly development of the city. Additionally, staff notes that this proposal would allow the city to incorporate a requirement to require annexation into a future community facilities district, the CFD, which would help to mitigate economic impacts to the city resulting from recordation and development of the site. That being said, staff recommends that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing, receive testimony regarding the proposed project, and take the following actions. Find the project previously assessed for environmental purposes, and adopt resolution number P-23-013, recommending City Council approval, the development agreement amendment, case number PLAN 23-0013, including any additional updates as deemed necessary by the City Attorney's Office prior to City Council approval. Staff remains available for any questions you may have.
Thank you for that report. Does the commission have any questions of staff this time? Okay. There being none, are there any questions or clarifications needed? Okay, I'll open the public hearing on agenda item number 2. Do we have any speakers on this item?
We do not.
Then I'll bring it back to, are there any other cards or any?
We have no speakers on this item.
If there are no other speakers on agenda item number 2, I will close the public hearing portion and bring it back to the commission for determination. Commissioners, I'll accept the motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt agenda item number 2 according to staff recommendations.
I second.
I have a first by Commissioner Marsh, a second by Commissioner Messin. Roll call vote, Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes with Vice Chair Cook Askins and Chair Kurth being absent.
Thank you. Next up is agenda item number 3. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Chairman Thomas. Item number 3 is case PLA 23-00017. It is an amendment to the Victorville Municipal Code with an environmental exemption, introducing various updates to Title 16, including but not limited to standards for off-street parking facilities for recreational vehicle parking and parking stalls abutting obstructions, and updates to accessory dwelling unit standards and the addition of junior accessory dwelling allowances in accordance with state law. This is applicable citywide. And as the commission may recall at our last meeting, staff briefed them on a concern with the current standards of RV parking, since it provided a limited exception for those that had a third car garage could park an RV in front of that garage, and it provided a mixed. There was a consensus that it provided a mixed message to the community, since most of the community couldn't place an RV in front of that third car garage, even if they had it, or it could fit before it encroached into the right of way. So with that, staff's returning with this proposed amendment. The RV parking that's provided in this ordinance would prohibit in whole all RV parking within the front yard area. It would permit parking within a street side yard area as long as it's behind a view obstructing fence. It does provide provisions for residents that may be gearing up for a camping trip to park their vehicle for 72 hours on site. It does give provisions to extend that for up to a 7 consecutive day period, not to exceed 21 days in any quarter. The provisions for RV parking also include provisions for a secondary driveway. We've received feedback from the community regarding an inability to access their rear yard to screen RVs. So we have introduced provisions for residents to obtain a secondary driveway approach. There are some exceptions. It can't go through a maintenance assessment district. If there's already a non-vehicular access along that property line, they wouldn't be able to access that. And there's also separation requirements from adjacent driveway approaches. Then thirdly, regarding parking, this is mainly for commercial developments. We have come across developers that want to add carports to existing parking lots, and the support structures for those carports, mainly to put solar within their parking. those support structures obstruct the free use of the parking stall when the support structures are adjacent to where you would exit your vehicle. So this amendment stipulates that an additional foot is required on those stalls unless it's placed at the front of the stall around the perimeter within the first 2.5 feet of the stall. So that's also for your consideration. And then lastly, various state laws have been put in place since the last accessory dwelling unit ordinance was put in place. So we have brought forward for your consideration updates to make sure that our ordinance is in compliance with the minimum state law requirements. This includes the inclusion of a junior accessory dwelling unit. There is an allowance for those to be placed in the existing residence. There's also some height stipulations. I also want to point to the late edition memo that was distributed to the commission and also posted online. There was some clarifying language that we wanted to add pertaining to that secondary driveway approach, but also some cleanup regarding the accessory dwelling units allowances. So that is been provided to you for your consideration. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing, receive testimony regarding the proposed amendments, and take the following action. Find the project categorically exempt under CEQA section guidelines 15061B3 and adopt resolution number P-23-012. And this is in accordance with the late edition memo version. This would be recommending City Council approval of the Municipal Code case number PLAN 23-00017. And with that, staff's available to answer any questions the commission may have.
Thank you for that report. Does the commission have any questions to staff at this time?
I had a couple. So I noticed that there was a change in height of the building from 16 to 25. I believe the law requires a minimum, and then we can set that. I just wanted to know what was the change in the height requirement.
So there was two provisions. The code, the state law, there was recent legislation that our city attorney caught that wasn't in the accessory dwelling unit handbook that we included. It does speak to height. 25 feet for any attached unit would be the maximum height allowed. And then also there was some provisions for detached structures. We currently are proposing 16 feet, which is in accordance with law, but there is some exceptions for structures adjacent to property lines or allowing for roof pitches to occur. So we mentioned those government code sections in subsection 5.7. And again, that's just to clarify. What we're trying to do here is make sure that we're in compliance with state law. What was mentioned in the staff report is one of our requirements to implement our housing element is to make sure that we're in compliance with all housing laws, including this accessory dwelling unit.
Thank you. And this is more just of a comment. I noticed that on page 106, it mentions a 6-foot fence when allowing for the recreation vehicle to be placed in the back. And then on page 116, it mentions a 5-foot fence. So I don't know if that was a typo, but if we can just get clarification on that, if it is 6 or 5 foot. And that's
Appreciate that. We did make a last minute change. Could you let me know what pages those were on again?
106 and 116.
Okay, so, the ordinance was changed to require it at, or it's proposed to require it at 5 feet. We didn't, it was a mistake on the staff report to not change that down to 5 feet. What we wanted to consider is that even though our current code requires 6 foot fencing, there is a lot of area in the city that only has 5 foot fencing or 5 foot gates. So as far as implementing this requirement, we wanted to, we didn't want to cause an enforcement issue over a foot difference when the residence that's been there forever has only had a 5 foot fence and they've been storing their vehicle behind that fence. So to answer your question, what was in the staff report is an error. What's in the proposed resolution and the amended resolution that was provided at 5 feet is the correct recommended ordinance to approve.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Marsh, any questions?
Nothing yet.
I have one question that comes to mind. I seem to remember at the last meeting we were discussing this issue that we talked about some type of a grandfather clause for existing residents that have motorhomes parked out in the front. Some consideration of giving them additional time or something to comply.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, and my apologies for not touching on it. It is within the ordinance subsection B under the size of parking facilities. It's municipal code section 16-3.21.050, subsection A, B, and at the end of that section, we've added recreational vehicle parking in front of a third car garage that was legally parked prior to the adoption of this code are permitted to remain in a legal nonconforming status until such time that a change in ownership of property or a recreational vehicle takes place, at which point compliance with the standards herein shall be required. So we do allow for that grandfathered status. The grandfather would go away after a change in ownership or change in recreational vehicle.
Thank you. That is the way I remember us speaking about it. So thank you for pointing that out. You talked about changes to the ADUs and the junior ADUs. Will you explain the difference? I know it, I read up on it, but for the audience in general, difference in an ADU and a junior ADU?
Sure. Over the past 10 years plus, the state has introduced numerous legislation that addresses accessory dwelling units. If I were to define an accessory dwelling unit, this is an independent living facility that's either attached or detached to the primary structure. A junior accessory dwelling unit, which is also permitted in addition to an accessory dwelling unit, those are accessory units that are within the primary dwelling unit's footprint. So that could be the conversion of an attached garage. It could be the conversion of a master bedroom to an independent living facility.
Okay, and that's good. I just wanted that pointed out because many times when the subject of ADUs come up, there's a difference between the junior. I know there's limitations as far as square footage and so forth.
Yes.
And again, attached or detached and so forth. So anyway, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. Yeah.
I just have one question, I guess, for clarification. When we're talking about the grandfather clause, did I hear it correctly that it is, as long as they have, they're grandfathered in, as long as they have ownership, the original ownership. So as soon as it changes ownership, then the new ordinance or the new regulations kick in. There's not a time frame, to where they have to make their adjustments. Because I mean, to me, some people will keep their RV forever, maybe.
The way that we're proposing the ordinance doesn't have a timetable associated with it. In in our opinion, when we were drafting it, I think that if there's so many limited, there's a limited amount of cases out there where they're actually permitted and compliant with our current law, where they're parked in front of the third car garage and they don't overhang into the street. So if they do meet the letter of law as it's currently stated, we're proposing that they can maintain that status as long as the ownership doesn't change and as long as they don't change to a different RV. But if the commission wants to, revisit that grandfather clause, put a timetable on it, we can definitely consider that.
No, that's fine. I thought there was. I mean, during the original discussion, and then as far as on the third, that secondary access way to the backyard, so that is going to be enforced as an actual access way into the backyard, and not a additional parking space where they could just park. 'Cause I mean, in my neighborhood, there's a couple of houses that I can recall. They have that third, kind of like a third. They have that as a secondary parking spot. You know, it's in the front of the house, off to the side, excuse me, off to the side. But that's where they're actually parking their fifth wheel or whatever it is that they're storing. And so that's not with consideration. I mean, that's still considered.
That would be prohibited by our current code. They'd have to park it in front of the third car garage. It'd have to be between the third car garage and the street. If they're parking it in front of the side yard and the street, that's not in compliance.
Okay.
The code that's provided to you today will allow for normal, vehicle parking within the street side yard as long as it's on a paved driveway that leads to the side yard. But that's not for recreational vehicles. The recreational vehicle would need to be behind a view obstructing fence behind the front wall plane of the house.
And then, just one more question. As far as like, now, if this is adopted today as is, can there be provisions put in to where maybe later on there can be a time restraint as far as the grandfather? It doesn't have to be right now, or can it be done later on, or does it have to be done like?
Correct. Yeah. If there was issues with some of these non-conforming RVs over time, that the commission wanted to introduce a code to curtail that nonconformity, we can introduce that at a later date.
Okay.
Okay. Just one comment about the RVs parking on the side, on paved driveways on the side of the house that were not, I guess, originally paved. But I see a lot of that as I drive, through the city, where there are spaces right beside the house, back behind the fence, but on the side. And I think I am of the impression that many of our citizens think that as long as they pull that RV back behind a gate, that they're legal. So we're saying something else here, that it either has to be out in front of the third car garage or a garage garage, between the street and the garage, or behind the house. Again, not on it, not crossing that plane of the house.
So, just to clarify, what I was speaking to was those RVs that are parked within the front yard. The way our current code is they're only allowed to park in front of the third car garage. So if they're parked in the front yard on the side or in any other portion of the front yard, it's not permitted. So to be in compliance with the law moving forward, they'd have to be outside of the front yard behind a view obstructing fence. But the way the code's written now is that those that are legally compliant today can have that grandfathered status as long as they don't change ownership.
So were there any other questions? Further clarification? Okay, if not, I'll open the public hearing on agenda item number 3. Do we have any speakers for this item?
We do not.
Are there any cards?
There are no cards.
Do we have anyone else that would like to speak on agenda item number 3? Okay, seeing no one, I will close the public hearing portion and bring it back to the commission for determination. We need a motion.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a motion to adopt agenda item number 3 according to staff recommendations.
I second the motion.
And just to confirm, that includes the revisions in the late edition memo.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a first by Commissioner Marsh, a second by Commissioner Messin. We'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes with Vice Chair Cook Askins and Chair Kurth being absent.
Thank you. Next up is agenda item number 4, a continuance request. Are there any updates at this time?
Not at this time, Commissioner Thomas. We do recommend that the commission continue this item to the August 9th meeting.
Well, thank you for that report. Does the commission have any questions or comments on this item? Hearing none. So are there,
Can you please speak into your microphone?
sorry. Are there any other questions or clarifications on this item? Okay, I'll open the public hearing on agenda item number 4. Do we have any speakers at this time?
We do not.
Are there any other cards?
There are no cards.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else that would like to speak on agenda item number 4? Okay, seeing no one, I will continue the public hearing to the Planning Commission's August 9th, 2023 meeting.
I'll second that.
So I have a first by Commissioner Thomas, second by Commissioner Marsh. Roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes,
Motion passes with Vice Chair Cook Askins and Chair Kurth being absent.
thank you. Next up is agenda item number 5, a new business item. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Agenda item number 5 is a discussion on a possible deemed approved ordinance. As noted in the staff report, we've prepared some draft text for review of that item that possibly could be recommended for adoption at a future meeting. However, at this point, staff has prepared a PowerPoint presentation to kind of go over the nuts and bolts of what a deemed approved ordinance is, the history of how the city of Victorville got here today, and then potential measures that could be included in a deemed approved ordinance should we proceed forward. I think we should have these on your screens as well in front of you, if we could make sure that goes on there. I believe IT department was going to put that on. If not, you do have copies in front of you. No? Okay. I'll hold one moment. There we are. Thank you. So again, we'll begin the discussion with a PowerPoint we prepared here. So beginning with what is deemed approved, it's a process to enforce current regulations on both existing and new businesses. To dig a little deeper there, a deemed approved ordinance exercises the city's authority over existing non-conforming establishments by issuing a deemed approved designation and establishing operating standards that non-conforming establishments must abide by in order to maintain their deemed approved designation. A deemed approved ordinance can introduce standards that are monitored by the city through an enforcement education program, which is paid for by a fee by the deemed approved establishments. Introduced standards address land use and public safety issues associated with alcohol and tobacco sales, such as loitering, increased police calls, noise, graffiti, illegal alcohol, tobacco sales, drug sales, etc. Currently, the city of Hesperia has a deemed approved alcohol ordinance, whereas regarding tobacco, Hesperia, Apple Valley, and Adelanto all have some form of a deemed approved tobacco regulations. Currently, our ordinances with more of the current standards go back to 2013, at which point we prohibited single-serve alcoholic beverages. Prior to 2013, our standards focused on sites with over-concentrated census tracts or within 300 feet of residential property. Regarding tobacco sales, we had no standards on tobacco sales at that point in time. In 2014, we tightened our alcohol sales regulations, prohibited liquor stores within 600 feet of residences and schools, and also required conditional use permits for most off-sale business licenses, introduced operating standards for new off-sale businesses, which were required as a part of the conditional use permit, and introduced limited exceptions to make a finding of public convenience or necessity in over-concentrated tracts. And this was primarily only allowing for large retailers and fueling stations to obtain that. Lastly, in 2015, we added tobacco product and paraphernalia requirements. At the same time, we also prohibited businesses such as gold exchange, hydroponic shops, marijuana dispensaries, smoking lounges, and any new smoke shops. So to note that we have a requirement or proposed requirement, we have to address what is a problem. So currently we have approximately 65 non-conforming alcohol tobacco retailers not being monitored as needed locally or by state agencies. Most of these businesses are not subject to any scheduled compliance inspections or oversight either at the state or local level, relying primarily on complaint-based inspections or inspections that are done for law enforcement or code enforcement being at the site for another reason. This leads to ongoing non-compliance with established operating standards and public nuisances, as noted. In order to address those problems, some possible solutions the Planning Commission could recommend for approval is adopting a deemed approved process to encompass existing non-conforming businesses. This would provide proactive enforcement and would include annual inspections. And businesses that were not in compliance would be subject to revocations of business licenses, conditional use permits, and or tobacco retailer's license when not in compliance. So included in the draft amendment that's proposed and presented to the Planning Commission for review regarding alcohol sales establishments, it would institute, as noted, an annual inspection process for most off-site alcohol sales establishments. And to clarify, I know I'm using off-site and off-sale as one and the same. Essentially, that means businesses that are allowed to sell alcohol for off-site consumption. As included in the proposal, it would exclude establishments such as supermarkets and large retailers not required to currently obtain a conditional use permit. And after the 12-month compliance period, if adopted, would revoke existing single-serve allowances for non-conforming alcohol retailers within the city. The types of standards that would be included be things such as advertising and display restrictions, maintenance standards, prohibition of drug paraphernalia, and training requirements. With regards to proposed tobacco retailers in the proposed amendment, it would add a tobacco retailer's license requirement that includes an annual inspection. For existing retailers, this would first include the requirement to obtain a deemed approved status if they are complying with existing regulations. It would add operating standards for all these tobacco retailers. As noted, it would include things such as display restrictions, maintenance standards, prohibition of drug paraphernalia, etc. To address the inspections and violations and what that would look like in work for new businesses, they would not have permission to operate without compliance with the current standards. So they would not be issued a business license, they would not be issued a tobacco retailer's license, or a certificate of occupancy until they were compliant with all regulations. Obviously, this would be following approval of a conditional use permit for any new business. No violations or fines are anticipated for these types of new businesses, in as much as if they open, they'd be operating illegally and be subject to other violations and notices in that case. For non-conforming businesses, they would be provided a 12-month compliance period. This would allow those businesses to get rid of stock that was no longer conforming. So in the case of alcohol, non-conforming business license, businesses would be given 12 months to rid their stock of single serve non-compliant with current code. After that 12-month compliance period, they'd be deemed a public nuisance. They would not be issued a business license renewal. They'd be subject to citation with applicable fees, administrative fees currently outlined in the municipal code, which entail $100 for the first violation, $200 for the second violation, $400 for the third violation, and $1,000 for each violation for more. It should be noted too that 12-month compliance period could end up being 12 to 24 months, as much as that notification process would begin upon the next business license renewal. Touch a little bit on that implementation measures that we have for this proposed. And with regard to compliant businesses, it would be based on an annual or complaint-based inspection. So they'd have their annual inspection in conjunction with any business license renewal, or be subject to complaint-based inspections. At that point, if there are notice of violations issued that are not addressed within 15 days, the city could move to conditional use permit, deemed approved status, or tobacco retail license revocation. So to address the general implementation and enforcement schedule for new businesses, it would begin immediately upon the effective date of any amendment recommended for approval and ultimately approved by the city council. For non-conforming businesses, we would provide a 12-month compliance period as noted, would require that pass initial compliance inspection, and it would begin with the next business license renewal period. So if the ordinance, for example, was adopted today, someone that had their business license renewed a week ago would not get their 12-month notification until the following renewal period, 11 months, at which point they'd have 12 months to comply. So this rolling implementation would provide code enforcement the ability to establish a rhythm with their enforcement schedule instead of bombarding them with every business at the time. And compliant businesses, again, would be annually on every business license renewal. An example implementation process for a new business is noted before you. So the first step would be the entitlement, which as it stands now would require a conditional use permit. License application would include their business license and tobacco retailer's license application. An initial compliance inspection, which they would have 30 days to correct in this case because they should not be in operation until they have that compliance passed. And then after all documents are submitted and inspections are passed, they'd have a license issuance. Beyond that, they'd be subject to annual monitoring, with a compliance inspection 30 days prior to any business license renewal and minimum of 15 days to correct any non-compliance issues that are noted. Here's an example of what an existing business process would look like. So again, the notification would happen upon the next business license renewal that's coming up from after the point that the ordinance was established. That would be notification would be provided via certified mail to the business owner and the property owner. That notice would include operational standards and a notice they're required to comply with those standards within 12 months. Upon the following license renewal, they would be subject to that 30-day inspection prior to that time. And if they were non-compliant, they'd have 30 days to correct that initial non-compliance. After that non-compliance period, if they remain in a non-compliant state, they could be deemed a public nuisance and issued fines accordingly. However, if they are in compliance, they would be granted a deemed approved status and be able to obtain their business license renewal and be subject to annual monitoring at that point forward. What we envision for the license to look like is, in addition to the business license, there'd be different checkboxes that would note if it's also a tobacco retailer's license or deemed approved status for alcohol. And to give an example of some items that this might address, we've product collages and pictures that things that could be addressed and subject to review of our code enforcement department as they do their annual inspections. So drug paraphernalia is shown in some of these instances. They are just available for reach at the counter level. It should be noted, there's, even if the paraphernalia is, I wouldn't say legal, but would fall without a definition or be considered for tobacco use, there would still be a limitation on the amount of size area that those items could be displayed, which is in current code and is implemented on new businesses. Maintenance standards could be enforced, overgrown landscaping, excessive signage, which would include advertising of alcohol in general, would be prohibited, as well as tobacco products. In this case, we see an example of not only is there alcohol and tobacco being advertised, it's also exceeding the limit of 20% of the window area being covered in signage, which is a standard municipal code in all businesses. So those types of things could be addressed by any inspection that we address. An example of self-serve tobacco products, which would be prohibited and is prohibited. And I would preface this slideshow with noting these are not all within the city of Victorville. So some of these are elsewhere out of state. Again, an example of self-serve tobacco next to alcohol, small bottles. Example of indoor smoking. A dimly lit establishment that advertises things that would be prohibited by our code if adopted. An example of loitering on site without the business owner moving to resolve the issue. So with that, staff has identified next steps if we are directed to proceed forward, or the planning commission provides some input that that's the direction we'd like to go. We need to finalize the draft ordinance and prepare a fee study. Public notice, we believe it would be pertinent to have a larger outreach than typical. So we would include impacted businesses directly, with a direct notice to those businesses. So any code amendment would require the 8-page ad and the notice in the paper. We would also, in this case, would plan to directly notice all impacted businesses in the city, so they would be active participants in the discussion, and all the bodies of the city would be able to hear their input as well. And then we'd move the public hearings to the planning commission for a recommendation and the city council for final approval. And with that, staff is open to hear any questions. We have included a recommendation in the staff report to either recommend the staff proceed with initiating a Victorville Municipal Code amendment, or that we maintain the current code as.
Okay, thank you for that excellent report. Does the commission have any questions of staff at this time?
I have a few, so please bear with me. I had a couple questions. So I noticed that it mentions window obstructions. Do barred windows apply to that? You tend to see some facilities having bars on their windows, and it may make it a little bit harder to look through. Would that be a reason to for someone to have code out there or to get fined? Does that apply to the obstruction of the 20%?
Historically, instructions we've meant to mean advertising or shelving against windows. As long as they're not impeding emergency access, we haven't historically counted bars in commercial applications.
Thank you. And then out of the 65 non-conforming, are any of those large retailers? Do we know?
Most that 65, I believe, excludes the large retailers such as supermarkets and pharmacies. There may be a few of the medium-sized dollar store type establishments that are in there because we were unclear of their actual size if they would exceed 8,000 square feet. So they may be included in there. But for the most part, supermarkets and retailers are not included.
And then as far as revoking the license, how does that work with ABC? Because I believe they provide a license as well. So what does that process look like, or that relationship with ABC?
Yeah, we've learned a lot with that process. ABC has to be an active participant in that from the beginning. So what we've learned from revocation of conditional use permits elsewhere in the city is that if we were to embark on revoking a conditional use permit for alcohol sales, that we would need to engage ABC from the beginning to ensure that they were on the same page and they had the justification that they needed to also revoke their alcohol license.
And I'm assuming that if this was passed, that would help that process.
Yes, absolutely. We would be able to establish the background and the materials needed to provide to ABC.
And if I could add to that, the state law is not preemptive, and by the state level, it still does give the locality the ability to revoke the licenses that they control. So by removing their business license, even though it's not their ABC license, we as a city still have the ability to stop the business from operating. Hopefully that clarifies it a little bit more.
It does, thank you. And then for the 12-month compliance period, if a business is now in compliance prior to that, can they tell city staff to come out and do an inspection and give them that clarify that?
Yes. If they wanted to get ahead of the process, I would envision we would absolutely allow that.
Okay. And then just the last comment, the compliance fees that they could be fined afterwards, are those built upon? So if the first fine is 100, the second 200, is a total of 300, or was it just an increase of 100? Do those fines build upon each other?
Yes, I believe the fees do build. Each violation is separate.
Okay. And then I just wanted to add to that, I do think if we are gonna do that, I do find the fees a bit minimal, especially just $100 the first time around. I mean, if I have a business, I think I wouldn't mind getting 3 or 4 fines before I actually start considering wanting to pay them. That's just me personally. I don't know about the rest of the commission, but I would look into maybe the fines and increasing those a little bit. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Just one question on the example implementation. In this process, you indicated that there could be a 30-day extension granted to come into compliance at certain steps here. Would, in any case, it change their anniversary date? Meaning,
Yeah, the 30-day allowance. So for a non-compliant business, they're required, as written, to have that compliance inspection at a minimum of 30 days prior to their renewal. So the thought process behind that initial compliance inspection is they get one opportunity to comply then within the 30 days before their renewal's up. and they essentially operate without a business license. Beyond that, though, once a business is compliant, that violation period, the corrective violation is reduced to 15 days. Because if they're already compliant, that means they've fallen out of compliance, and it should be easier to resolve that.
Okay, but in any event, their anniversary date for renewal would stay the same. It would not
Correct.
go out. Okay. And that's it for me.
I have a few questions. As far as the potency of this ordinance, right now it's a combined ordinance. Would it make it more potent, to separate the ordinance? Is it gonna put more teeth into certain elements? Could it stay combined and be just as potent, or do we have to, is it gonna become more potent if you cut out a separate tobacco ordinance?
So with staff's mindset going into creating a framework for inspections on businesses that haven't had inspections prior to this or proactive, the only inspections that have been incurred really are those that are reactive to a complaint. We were looking at ways, since alcohol and tobacco are typically sold at the same location, we've combined them into one process of inspections. However, there was comments today about, requiring standards for tobacco retailers, no matter what size. So if the commission, had issues with our limited focus on the smaller establishments, we can entertain that. But what we're trying to do is just streamline a process to start with, and then if over time we can see what impact it makes, and if the larger establishments are found to be a nuisance, which from our analysis they're not. It's the smaller establishments. Then we can analyze that then.
Okay. And then as far as, so even though it's kind of set in, every establishment's gonna have an annual inspection, but potentially they could have multiple inspections, because if there's reports that they're out of compliance or doing something unethical or whatever, then code enforcement can go out without notice and inspect.
Correct. Complaint-based inspections, they could go to inspect the location. We also envision working with the police department to notify us of things that may happen on the premises. So let's say a liquor store. So if there is a cited drug sale or some other infraction that happened, or criminal offense, then we would be notified of that as well. And code enforcement could also take action on that separately than the proceedings with the police department.
Okay. And then as far as defining what is, paraphernalia. Because I've talked with, I think that there's potentially a lot of focus, or more focus, I guess, put on alcohol and tobacco, because that's been around a lot. Well, the focus has been there a lot longer. Okay. But as far as drug paraphernalia, because, there's so many different loopholes, and there's so many different ways to get around what is the use of this particular object, and so the only person, and the only people that buy that, as far as like the oil burners and stuff, I've never bought an oil burner, or, well, I have, but it's an incense burner, but it looks like it's supposed to be for incense, and I don't have to blow on it to get, the scent out and stuff. Is there going to be or can there be a more defining, this, so it's not left up to interpretation, to where, the owner says, well, I didn't know that you guys consider this drug paraphernalia. Okay. So if it's, something that's more defining, to say, these are the objects that we do not, as a city, want to see in your establishment being sold.
Yeah, I think that we're as a staff, we're more than willing to engage the community to get input on what might make that definition stronger and more enforceable. Ultimately, I think we would defer to the city attorney's office and on a large part of that, what's actually enforceable and what challenges it might withstand. But initially, at least putting it in the code and defining it and what defines it, I think we're open to conversations there and strengthening the current language we have and any proposed language. Absolutely.
If I could add, I just want to point out that the draft ordinance that's before you, it is an initial draft. If the commission gives direction that this is a type of inspection program that they want to proceed with, we'll do additional analysis and make sure that every section is very clear. We want to get input from the stakeholders, like Mr. Hadigi mentioned, that we'll be notifying these non-conforming businesses. There's at least 65 of them that we've tallied up. So we're noticing them, and they're going to be coming to the commission meetings and engaging with staff as well with their own input. So this process may take a few meetings. You may get comments from both sides. You may agree with some, you may not. This process, we wanted to make sure that we allow the stakeholders an opportunity to comment, and this is an effort to get their businesses in compliance, not out of business. And that's the issue that we're grappling with, is that the efforts we've made over the last 10 years with operating standards, yes, it may have stopped the proliferation of some of these uses, but it hasn't addressed some of the original uses that caused us to change our standards. So we're trying to get them into compliance, having a framework of an ordinance that has teeth, that gives clear guidance will keep these businesses in line, and if they're not, then there'll be the penalties to suffer from that.
Yeah, no, that's all I have. Thank you.
Any other questions or clarifications? Okay. So at this time, and considering what you said there, Scott, about additional considerations and so forth, but I'll ask for a motion from the commission regarding staff's recommendations. And I move to continue this item.
To continue the item, Bill, to the next meeting, or one of the recommendations.
Well, the reason I said I moved to continue it because,
Can you please speak into your microphone?
sorry. The reason I said to continue it is because Paul was mentioning being a little more definite about items that can be allowed in these stores for sale. And I think the more detailed we can be as far as what you can and can't do, the better we'll be as a city, because if everyone understands that we're playing from the same rule book, I think we'll all be a lot better off.
So if I could clarify, if you were to continue this new business item, it would return as a new business item. That would limit your ability to receive public comment and start that amendment process. So if you are, we realize that all of the issues haven't been sorted out yet in the ordinance, and that you want to get more details. But if, as a commission, you're in favor of exploring this ordinance, then I would recommend that you adopt staff's recommendation number A. That would allow staff to bring this back in a public hearing format where we properly notice and receive input from the community. And then if if there's still issues, it can still be continued after that. But I just wanted to clarify that on the continuance.
And Scott,
Thanks.
as we receive that,
Thank you for that clarification. I withdraw my motion.
sorry, as we receive the input, we can also modify the way it's written and add amendments and stuff, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we just wanted to provide this initial draft for you as a starting point. Obviously, you get the understanding of framework of the ordinance, but we realize that we'll benefit from the public hearing process to get additional input.
Oh, but before we, one more thought came to mind. Because we have the tobacco, you have different categories. You have tobacco, alcohol. Can you categorize like the drug paraphernalia as a separate, category within the ordinance to where, okay, there's, you see where I'm kind of going with.
Yeah, I took note of the comments made today, and we'll look into a way that we can define those and differentiate between those that are strictly for tobacco and those that are used for other purposes that are not legal. So we'll definitely dive into that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Then I go ahead and move staff's recommendation to initiate the process.
That would be option A.
Yes, option A.
Yes, and I'll second that.
I have a first by Commissioner Messin, a second by Commissioner Marsh. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas. Motion passes with Vice Chair Cook Askins and Chair Kurth being absent.
Thank you so very much for all the information. We'll move on to presentations or reports from the commission or staff. We'll start commissioner. Are there any reports?
Not really a report. I just want to give kudos and a great big, real, a heartfelt thank you to code enforcement and to the city staff for the progress that we're making as far as cleanup. The city is really starting, to me, there's certain areas, and I always go back and I look at these areas day after day, and well, not day after day, as I'm driving, but like our retail establishments, like the one that I noticed the most around Lowe's, and the little food joints that are around there. The parking lots are really looking clean. The trash receptacles, the gates are closed. There's not trash sitting all outside. So that's really good. The biggest thing that I wanted to say a great big thank you for, though, is that wash that runs along it's along Bear Valley. It runs behind Walmart and the Alaska building. That looks good. I mean, it is clean. It's really clean. There's no encampments inside the wash. The debris is out of the wash. So the next big rain we don't have to worry about all that debris washing out into the desert. So just a kudos and a great big thank you. That's all.
I don't have any, but just thank you to everyone and sorry for all the questions. Appreciate it.
I just have a couple things today to say. One is that I ask that we all continue to keep Commissioner Cook Askins in prayer. We pray for his healing. I want to really thank staff for a really good job today on the material that you provided. And it's a pleasure working with all of you because if I go wrong, I'm sure correct. So I appreciate that. And my fellow commissioners, thank you for your support. Thank you, citizens of Victorville, for being tolerant, patient with us. And we don't always agree, but we as commissioners do try to, and staff do try to do the right thing for the city. And with that, I don't have anything else. Any other comments from staff or?
No, just that we echo your sentiments on Commissioner Cook Askins Jr.
Well, if that being, if there be no further business, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.